So there's been a lot of talk about Canada becoming the 51st state, and it made me really begin to wonder how much smaller is the Canadian economy, and if things had turned out a little bit differently and some of the other states had joined Canada instead of the United States, how many of those states would it have taken for the Canadian economy to be the same size as the United States economy? Today on Bally the Dolly. So if you look at the Canadian economy, it's about $2.2 trillion a year for the gross domestic product, and this is as of 2023. The United States economy is almost $27 trillion a year, which makes the United States economy almost 13 times larger than the Canadian economy. Also, the population is obviously considerably larger in the United States versus Canada. But then I began to wonder what states would actually be on the border and make a significant economic difference to the gross domestic product of what would have been a larger Canada. So the first thing I thought about doing is taking Minnesota, Michigan, and New York, because all three of those states already receive electricity from Canada, directly from Canada. So it seemed that they would be kind of a logical set of states to integrate there. And if you look at those states, New York alone has a huge GDP of 2.1 trillion, which is almost the same size as Canada. If you take that along with Michigan, which is 0.6 trillion, and Minnesota, which is 0.4, that means 3.1 trillion added to Canada's 2.1, which means over 5 trillion right there alone for Canada. And then I began to think, okay, well, that's still really not enough, because even if you take those out, that still means that the United States has 24 trillion, right? Or somewhere around there, but still way more than what the Canadian economy would have. And then I thought, well, let's look at some of the territories that have swapped hands. So you can look at the Louisiana Purchase, right? Louisiana, that whole area of the center of the United States, had been territories of France. And then during the Franco-Indian Wars, that 7-year period, ending really in 1760, 63, that land was ceded to Spain and some to Great Britain. And France was really abolished from any land holdings in North America. And it wasn't again until almost 1800 when Napoleon came back in, winning the wars against Spain, and took that land known as the Louisiana Purchase, that area, back into the hand of the French, and then within a year ended up selling it to the United States. So certainly a lot of the land that we think of as the United States is handed or changed hands a number of times between the Spanish, between the French, between the British, and then to the Americans as well. In the actual colonial United States, those colonies, and then later the country of the United States of America. So if you look over on the West Coast, you can take Washington State, Oregon, and California, and those really have really significant economic impact. So California, the economy is over twice the size of Canada's economy at $4.4 trillion. So adding Canada to California and New York, Washington, Oregon, Michigan, and Minnesota makes a significant balance, but still with all of these, you're still not hitting an equivalent dollar amount. In essence, this would leave Canada with about 10 trillion, right? And it would leave the United States still significantly larger. So what other states could you possibly throw into this mix? Well, let's look at a few other ones, since the goal is to get up to about 13.5 trillion, right? So if you took Massachusetts at 0.8 trillion, Virginia at 0.7, New Jersey at 0.9, or almost a trillion, Pennsylvania again at 0.9, almost a trillion, Maryland at 0.5, that's another 3.8 trillion to throw on top of there. And that would give you about the same economy in the United States as what you would have in Canada. What would the differences be if those states had decided to join Canada instead of the United States? Well, all along the West Coast, excluding Alaska, all of those ports would be part of Canada, and the United States really wouldn't have port access on the West Coast there. Also, The tech companies are really located inside of California, and a lot of national defense companies are located in there. So tech companies, for example, would all be part of the Canadian economy, along with aerospace, a lot of the aerospace industry that's coming out of Washington State. And you can't forget Oregon with the breweries and a lot of agricultural production like cherries and fruits and wine. And then if you go over towards Minnesota, you have companies like General Mills and 3M, leading technological and food producers. And you also have in Michigan the automotive industry. And if you go into Massachusetts, you have robotics and a number of other different industries that are predominant in that area. And then if you get into the area of New York, you're talking about the financial heart of North America. So if things had turned out a little bit differently, Canada would really have the financial center of North America, along with the heart of the automotive industry. 14.5 trillion for the US, 14.5 trillion for Canada, somewhere around there, right? What would that do or place them inside of the hierarchy of largest economies? Well, that would make China the largest economy. That would make the United States the second largest economy at a little over 14.8. It would make Canada at 14.4, somewhat smaller. And then below that would be, again, Germany, Japan, and a number of other countries. So it still, if it had worked out that way, leave both the United States and Canada as economic powerhouses, but you would see an incredibly different way of viewing North America and how those countries and their power bases in different industries would really have been split, even though the population still would be much larger in the United States than it would be in Canada, even with those states moving over. So I'm really interested to hear your feedback if those, for example, would have been the states that you thought would have been likely to have decided to have joined Canada instead of the United States. And if you find this information interesting, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe, and I look forward to talking with you again soon. This is Ted. Thanks again. Bye now.